Hello there. A long time ago, I went to visit my parents in London. I was living in Kent and they were living in Cornwall, so we were separated by quite a long distance, saw each other rarely. And we'd arranged it, and I decided to take them to one of my favourite restaurants in London in the West End called Neal's Yard. Now, at that point, it was a really special place because when you went to eat your food, which you did upstairs, it was all laid out with huge cushions on a raised surface. So basically there were no normal chairs and tables to sit on at all. And I was taking a slight risk, wondered if they would appreciate this restaurant. Well, I would say it was one of the highlights of their lives, and I want to explain why. Because as we sat down with our food, we happened to notice that the person sitting next to us is Anthony Hopkins. Now, both my mum and dad really liked Anthony Hopkins. He's been a world famous actor for a very long time, and he was certainly world famous at that point. And they immediately started to engage him in conversation, which rather surprised me because first of all I thought, well, is a world famous actor going to want to talk to my parents? I really thought he'd just want them to bugger off and leave him alone, but no, he was right up for this. And so they entered into a really profound conversation which went on for about 2 hours. And at the end of the conversation, we got up to leave, said goodbye to Anthony Hopkins, and my parents announced that they were off. That was it. That was as much time as they had, and they went to get their train. And throughout this experience, I was going through what I can only regard to be crushing disappointment, because we rarely saw each other. This was an opportunity once in a couple of years. I'd actually spent the entire time talking to Anthony Hopkins. So my ego felt crushed by this experience, and it felt to me like I just didn't matter, and that I might as well not have been there. All I was there to do really was just introduce him to the restaurant. Hey, there's Anthony Hopkins, you get on with it. Because during the entire conversation, I didn't participate at all. I think I was rather surprised and overwhelmed to see this happening before my eyes. My parents and Anthony Hopkins having this great conversation, which they obviously thoroughly enjoyed. So that was certainly a surprise to realise he would have time for a couple of people he never met before. But this is really what this whole film about, because the title of this one is What We All Need. Now, when our basic needs are met, when we've got the assurance we have enough food, we're not going to starve to death, enough to drink, and we can be warm, we've got somewhere safe to be, so our essential survival needs are met, then one of the very next needs that we all seem to have is the need for what I can only describe as attention. And so my ego got really upset because my parents gave all the attention to a third party and none to me. And it's an experience that I've thought about at odd times throughout my life, but when I woke up in the early hours this morning, it came up to me very strongly. And it's something I've looked at a great deal, the fact that we all have a need for attention. And one of the things I love about my partner is she's very clear about things, and she says, the main thing that I need is attention, and of course she's quite right. And that's the main thing that I need too. And my point is, this is a universal need, and I feel it's a big reason why social media has become such an overwhelming compulsion for us all. And I can remember not so long ago in my life that I didn't have any access to any screens whatsoever. When I lived up at Middlewood, 225 acres off-grid, no means of electricity, no means anything, no internet, except for one building, and it was sporadic at best, but basically no access to any screens. And now I realise that my life is such that I've got screens coming up my ears, including the one I'm using to record this film. So what I'm aware of is that whether we have screens or whether we don't, we all have this need for attention, because that incident I described all the way back then, I only had no access to any screens, but I still, like all people, had this need, this desire, this compulsion to gain attention. And so I've noticed how different people have different ways to go about it. And one that comes very strongly to my mind, and it came up this morning, is when I was hosting my retreats for 10 years without a break, as I did do, there's one particular person who arrived on the retreat, and within a very short space of time I noticed how he'd gathered a group of retreat participants around him, and they were listening to every word that he said. He had hooked the attention of everyone in the space, and they were all fascinated by what he had to say. And I noticed that, and later on in the retreat, when I got the opportunity to do so, I went and had a little chat with him and explained how I can see that you really do enjoy getting attention from other people. However, the point of this retreat isn't for other people to get your attention. It's actually for them to have their own experience and to be in their own process as well. So I'd like you just kind of recognize this is what you obviously need, and just give it a bit of a rest. And he understood very well indeed. Totally got the point, and everything went fine. But again, it brought up to me the extent to which people need attention. So in his particular case, he did explain when we had a conversation, he said, what I learned really early on in life, I didn't have any obvious skills. There wasn't anything about me that would naturally draw people's attention towards me. So I decided what I would do is I would become very erudite and very clever. And the way he chose to do this was to become a poet. And his poetry encompasses all the themes that affect all of us human beings on our life journey. And so that's what he was doing. He was simply doing what he was best at, which was having a group of people around him, and he was simply talking but declaiming his poetry, which really touched all of us. And in fact, later on the retreat, I did actually record some and put it up on my channel. So if you were to go searching through the archives, you would no doubt find the film of him declaiming his poetry, which is extraordinarily good. So this is what I'm aware of. I'm aware that we all have this great need for attention, and I think that if you're in a relationship with someone, if you try a little experiment, be very careful about this, but just see what happens just for a short period of time if you don't give your partner any attention, and see what the response you get is. And this was illustrated beautifully when I watched an episode of a TV show on Netflix last night, and there's a particular point where the surgeon is in the room just outside the operating theatre, and someone from a different floor who's much lower status comes into the room, and he wants to ask the surgeon something. He's got something to say, and the surgeon just really can't be bothered. He just doesn't want to know. But this guy's really insistent he's got something that he feels is important to share. And with great reluctance, the surgeon turns around and with overweening arrogance gives him a few moments. And the guy says, "This is a member of the surgical staff, one of your team. It's their keys. I want to return them. Can you tell me how?" And he just says, "I'll take them," snatches the keys off him, turns his back on the guy and ignores him. And I could see in that moment how, for that man, the one that was giving the keys, his ego was also thoroughly discombobulated. He felt so disappointed because all he was trying to do was to do someone a favour, and he'd been treated as if he didn't exist, as if he had no value whatsoever. And I could see that that surgeon had actually made an enemy in that little moment. So it does seem to be such an important need for all of us to have attention. And so I feel that this is what's happened. This is why social media has taken off the way that it has done, because it addresses a need that we all have. And we all used to find ways to get attention before social media existed. We just used to have face-to-face conversations with people, which in many ways is far superior, of course. It's just that it explains how important this need is. And now here we all are making use of whatever facilities, and there are so many ways that people use to draw attention. One of the key ones used by women and also some men is sheer physical attractiveness. If the person knows that they look really good, then they're going to get a lot of attention, and they're not going to need to really make any effort. People who don't have that physical attractiveness as their trump card in their deck have to go to more elaborate lengths, like the guy who became a very renowned poet, very successful. That was another way. Another way is simply to become an expert in something. If there's something that you know a lot about, you can do what I do, make films and put them up on YouTube, or use any other method to share your information with people. That's another way you can get attention. And one of the things that vastly amuses me, there are a number of people on YouTube, quite a lot of YouTubers, and they make films about narcissism, and they talk about narcissists as if these are the most evil people on the planet. And don't get me wrong, when narcissism slips from being a simple human trait into being a pathology, it is a responsibility and the cause of a lot of suffering. But I just do find it amusing, these people actually getting in front of a camera and quite narcissistically talking about narcissism ad length, ad nauseam, over and over. So really I'm saying that narcissism is one of the essential human qualities. We all need attention because it's what makes us feel good, and when we don't get it, like I didn't on that afternoon with my parents, it feels really awful. Another way that people get attention, this particularly happens to people when they become of an advanced age. They share about their illnesses, and this becomes their fundamental point with which they can talk to other people about. It's something that they are going through, it's something that matters to them, it's something they feel passionate about. And sometimes you'll notice a bunch of old people and all sitting down in a circle and they're all talking about their illnesses. Again, it serves the same function. When you get young parents, they talk about their children or their babies. It's the same thing. So I recognise it to be one of the fundamental human traits. If you like, it's a dark side of the ego, the fact that we seem to need this in order to be able to function. And I watched a film very recently, and I'm going to put a link, and that was about a woman who has very low self-esteem. In fact, there's two. There's one which is a Korean one, and there's one which is an American one. And in each case, the woman is suffering from very low self-esteem. And in each case, something very special happens. In the case of the American one, the woman has an accident in the gym. And coupled with the person who's leading the group speaking very forcefully, this creates a moment of imprint vulnerability, as Timothy Leary calls it. And when you get a moment of imprint vulnerability, that's when some shock or trauma happens, and then you can get a reprogramming event. So the words that were uttered by this person when she had the accident cause her to reprogram her perception of herself from very low self-esteem to very high self-esteem. So she had exactly the same body. Nothing was changed in that way. The only thing that was changed was her perception of herself. And she walked out of that gym and she suddenly created a totally different life for herself based purely upon the shock, the trauma, the imprint vulnerability and the reprogramming. In the case of the Korean woman, the woman has also chronically self-esteem, but this person they had a very strong childhood friendship, this woman and this man, and they spent many years apart, and one day they meet and he was always in love with her, and his love is rekindled as he meets her, and she's got such low self-esteem that she spends a lot of time rejecting him because she just doesn't think that she's worth it. She doesn't think she's worthy of his attention, and he has to literally wage a campaign against her negative perception of her persona until finally he pumps her ego up enough to the point where she's actually able to accept that she does have something to offer this man. And then they fall in love and their relationship blossoms and all is good. So attention, that is what we all need. And the reason I want to bring this to your attention is it helps you to understand a little bit about why people do what they do, why social media is off the charts in terms of popularity, because when people lead lives whereby actually in their workplace they're spending most of the time in front of a screen, so they're quite isolated. When they go home, a lot of people are similarly isolated, so it's a very straightforward mechanism whereby you can access other people's attention. We need attention in order to thrive. That's what Anthony Hopkins and my parents taught me that day in that restaurant. Thank you, and thank you for your attention. And may you obtain the attention you require in your life to feel that you can function adequately. Cheers.